Anyway, let's try that again. Let's go back to 1978, where things are sure to turn out fine. It is 1978, Jetstorm. It's amazing. We made it. Back to 1978. I had a restless night's sleep. That is exactly what happened to me last night, unfortunately. So I can relate. I can relate to the text on the screen right now. How's it going, Jetstorm? Hope you're doing well. I did nothing but turn over repeatedly during the night, and it seemed like it lasted for an eternity. Even then, I eventually fell asleep at some point, not realizing how high in the sky the sun had risen. Gotcha. Understood. I shook off the urge to go back to sleep. It was then that I noticed the phone was ringing. The time was almost 10:30 in the morning. It was clearly too late for a wake-up call. That's what you want when you wake up first thing in the morning, is you want to hear that lively, jovial voice on the other end of a phone line.
Ohayou gozaimasu, Oishi desu.
Waking up to the sound of Oishi's voice was a little too much of a shock. Only if he's beside you, right? Yeah, I hear you. I know where you at. My delicate ears were ringing. But thanks to the shock, I was suddenly wide awake.
どうも。おはようございます。
ひょっとして今お目覚めですか？出張中とはいえ勤務時間には起きないといけませんよ。
まったくです。以後気をつけます。
あなたの眠気をもう一つ覚ましてあげられるかもしれない話があります。ひなみ沢駐在所から届いた遺失物に興味深いものが混じっていたんです。
Something interesting mixed in with the lost and found? What could this be?
遺失物。
詳しい話はこちらにいらっしゃってからにしましょう。お昼前に来れますか？
いえ、すぐに伺います。
Do we think a body is about to be discovered? Oishi already knew what my mission was. Since Oishi said it was something that would wake me up, it was hard to believe that it would be irrelevant to me. Honestly speaking, judging by the information from Sato-san yesterday, knowing that my cover was already blown, I couldn't wander to and fro from Hinamizawa carelessly. In other words, my investigation was at an impasse. If there was some information there that could put me back on the trail, that would be nothing less than a stroke of good fortune. After vigorously washing my face, I pulled on my jacket and hailed a taxi, heading towards the Okinomiya police station.
おお、来た来た。天才ジャンシ様の到着だ。
遅くなって申し訳ありません。で、一体何が出たんですか？
With absolutely no intention of reminiscing about last night's Mahjong game, I pressed him to get to the point. Oishi, anticipating that I would act that way, cut to the chase without any resistance.
先ほども申し上げましたが、今朝ひなみ沢の駐在所から遺失物が届きました。
Lost items that were turned over to the police box were sent to Okinomiya Station after the paperwork was filled out. Oishi pulled out a plastic bag from the drawer and laid its labeled contents on the desk.
財布ですか？
でしょうな。中には小銭はあってもお札はなかったもんなんで、スリが中身を抜いた後に捨ててったのかななんて思ったんですがね。最初は。
I didn't understand how this wallet, so far removed from Tokyo, could possibly be related to the kidnapping. If it had drawn Oishi's attention, it would have to be something dramatic, like if the wallet belonged to the missing grandchild. That would be absurd. Like, something that convenient would happen. If that was it, then there would probably be initials written on the wallet. The initials of Toshiki and Itagai and the minister's grandson, T.I. Thinking like that, at this point I didn't suppose that this wallet was something that could get Oishi so excited. Oishi, after putting on a pair of disposable plastic gloves, handed me a pair of the same. I didn't feel that this wallet was such an important thing, so I had my doubts about whether whether there was any point in putting on gloves. However, I didn't want Oishi's intentions to get away, so I put them on. Oishi opened up a plastic bag and pulled it out, showing me the back. As I had imagined, there were initials engraved there, but it was slightly more detailed than what I had thought, with Toshiki I written on. Oishi grinned at me with a look at his face and said, "See? We can't confirm that any of it belongs to the minister's grandson," I informed him calmly. This wallet was irrelevant. It was nothing more than Oishi's overeagerness. First of all, there was absolutely no way in the distant locale that the missing grandson's wallet could be found in such a convenient timing. After all, the Onikafuchi Defense Alliance wasn't related to the case in the first place, so there was no way the wallet belonged to the grandson. Why I wanted to decide that was the case, even I didn't really know. Even though what should have been a top-secret case was leaked before I had even been dispatched. In this situation, how could I say this was definitely unrelated? Would it be more prudent to pay more attention to this wallet? I don't know why he's being so dumb about a very clear piece of evidence. It had only been a couple of days since I arrived in Himatsubushi, but in those couple days, due to the number of remarkable events, my nerves might have become just a little frayed. Shaking my head slightly, I cleared it of unnecessary thoughts. Oishi opened the wallet zipper, revealing its contents. Inside was small change and a number of crumpled receipts. Oishi, from that jumble, pulled out a folded card. Seeing that, my heart stopped for a moment. It was a card from a dental examination. The name, Toshiki Inagai, and the age. Boy, you're just really on the ball here today, Akasaka. I mean, come on, dude. There is absolutely no point in time when that wallet was not going to belong to this child, especially with Toshiki I written on it. A perfect match. Wowee! The dentist's location was in Tokyo. There was no need to explain any further. How far was it from Tokyo to Himatsubushi? It was far enough that taking bullet trains and cars would still take several hours. Why would a wallet with a dental examination card from Tokyo inside show up in Himatsubushi? Could it belong to a tourist who came from Tokyo? Or maybe a villager on location to Tokyo just happened to pay a visit to the dentist? No, it had to have fallen into somebody's bag by accident. In my mind, I desperately struggled to find a possible excuse as to why this wallet didn't belong to Toshiki Inagai. It was as if it just wouldn't do for this wallet to belong to him. However, weeding out any possibility for error one by one, the haze surrounding the wallet in front of me was faded, gradually letting it come into clear focus.
Ne?
I felt a shiver of electricity run up my spine. My pulse quickened and a thin film of sweat began to coat my entire body. From Oishi's point of view, I was probably slack-jawed and spaced out, with a slovenly look on my face.
問い合わせましたか？
そりゃ赤坂さんの仕事でしょ。私はまだそこまでは。
この財布はいつ頃のものでしょうね。
拾ったのは村人です。昨日のことだそうで。
じゃなくて、この財布はいつ頃落ちたものでしょうね。
I still don't see what the big deal would have been with Oishi just calling. That seems really fucking silly to me if we're trying to find a lost child that is likely kidnapped by dangerous people. I kind of figure Oishi at some point with that wallet and that dental card would have done some fucking homework too. Come on now. Everybody's being really stupid right now.
ここいらに雨があったのはちょうど先週7日前。中身が水にやられた様子はないから最長で6日前からでしょうね。
この財布の存在は署内で誰が知ってます？
初期対応のひなみ沢駐在所の警官、それから遺失物対応で係が 2,3 人、あとは私とあなた。内緒の事件と関係があったらまずいでしょ。ベラベラとは喋ってないつもりですよ。
電話を借りていいですか？
どうぞどうぞ。外線は0発信から。
I dialed the phone number inscribed on the examination card. I could hear my pulse pounding inside my head. There could possibly be something. Could there possibly be something so absurd? The addresses on the receipts and cards inside the wallet were all from around the area where the grandson lived. The name on the examination card was also a match. The time that we deduced the wallet to have been left behind also matched up with the timeline of the kidnapping. Of course, it was possible I could just laugh it off as one big pile of coincidences. There wasn't any strong evidence. What? Is this guy just an idiot? Rather than all this circumstantial proof, the contents of the phone call I was about to make would have a much greater
はい、
meaning.
お待たせしました。中川歯科です。
どうも。こちらは沖宮署です。実はお財布の落とし物がありまして、所有者の連絡先を探しております。ご協力をいただいてもよろしいでしょうか。お財布の中にそちら様の診察カードが入っておりまして。ええ、氏名は犬飼俊樹くんです。カードの番号を申し上げますので、電話番号をお調べいただいてもよろしいでしょうか。ええ、ありがとう。お願いできますか。
Still holding the receiver, I pulled out a notebook from my breast pocket with my free hand. I opened it up to the page where the grandson's address and phone number were recorded.
どうもすみません。はい。お願いします。
I compared the phone number written on my notebook with the one that was being read out on the other end of the line. I bet it's a match. During the process, I spun around to look behind me uneasily. I locked eyes with Oishi. Oishi looked puzzled, wondering what the matter was. Why would I feel uneasy and look behind me? That was because the person on the other end of the line was reading out the numbers as though doing so straight from my notebook. Is this guy an idiot? Like, what the fuck happened to this guy? Did he just turn into a complete idiot overnight? It seemed that HQ was in quite an uproar thanks to my report. No matter how many times the authenticity of the evidence I had linked to the grandson was called into question, I could only respond that it was the truth. When the lead investigator first picked up the phone, I was grilled about the evidence I had found that was almost too good to be true, if I do say so myself. But after having doubt after doubt dispelled, he fell into silence. The receiver was finally handed over to the section chief. When he picked it up, the background thumb at the end of the line disappeared, and I knew that it had gone completely silent. Maybe, I don't know. It just seems a little like I don't know. I feel like this character is being written to be completely dumb at this point, where there's been no real indication that he's this bad at his job. Like, this is a solid fucking lead. After asking the same questions about the wallet that the lead investigator did, the chief quietly spoke his next words.
わかりました。こちらから何人か増援を送ります。今日の夕方には到着できるでしょう。赤坂君は引き続き現地調査をお願いします。財布が発見された地域の情報を収集しててください。加納さんは何人か選んで現地へ直接。
Well, this is a jam right here. That is a solid jam right here. The fact that he was sitting Kano, the lead investigator here, meant that the chief had decided there was possibility that the Onagafuchi Defense Alliance were somehow implicit in the kidnapping. However, it felt as though until the lead investigator, whom he trusted, had verified the evidence with his own eyes, he was still going to be skeptical about it.
どうでした？
本庁から増援が出発するそうです。私は現地調査を命じられました。財布の落ちていた場所はどこなんです？
高津戸のあたりだそうです。ここが沖宮。ずーっと行ってここがひなみ川で、さらに上流にぐーっと上がっていくとこの辺が高津戸です。
Oishi explained where the wallet was found by pointing the location on the map of the wall. A place called Takatsudo, man, I cannot read today, was even more remote than Himatsubushi was.
高津戸界隈はほとんど民家なんかありませんよ。 昔の廃村です。無人の家屋が点在する、なんとも寂しいあたりですね。
大石さん、高津戸へ案内してもらうことはできますか？
構いませんよ。赤坂さんお一人ではなかなか自由にひなみ沢に出入りはできないでしょうからね。無論また野球帽とマスクをしてもらうことになりますが。
That Oishi had agreed to accompany was very reassuring. If Sato-san's info was to be believed, my cover had been blown. I wasn't sure if the villagers had realized that fresh meat dispatched from the public safety was the tourist that had visited the village yesterday, or in other words, me. By deciding that they hadn't noticed would have been more overly optimistic. Given a cursory thought, Takatsudo, where the wallet was found, couldn't be ruled out as a hiding spot for the kidnappers. The Takatsudo area didn't have any residential buildings, nor was it alongside a highway. There wasn't a reason for even the locals to go out of their way to visit it. Are we sure who out? Yeah, we've seen Nakasaga. It was exactly what you would call a long-forgotten ghost town at the end of the road. You couldn't ask for a better place to hold a kidnapped grandson. Also, you couldn't get Takatsudo without passing through Hinamizawa first. Those several conditions made this area all the more important. I couldn't brush it off any longer. There was no longer any doubt that Onigafuchi Defense Alliance or somebody hired by them were involved in the kidnapping. Yeah, he in no way looks like Tomitake. If that was the case, then the fact that this wallet was found might have already been leaked to them. They even knew so much as how the Public Safety Division was operating. The case of the wallet couldn't be something they didn't know. In that case, there was a possibility that the enemy was lying in wait. To dive alone into enemy territory, surrounded by enemy territory, to say the least, required an amount of courage, nay, recklessness, that I did not have.
大石さんの同行がなければ、そうおいそれと踏み込めない村でしたので、ご協力いただけて本当に助かりました。正直なところ、またお金を要求されるのではと思ってましたよ。
それは正直を言えば、ひなみ沢なんか好き好んできたがないですからね。運賃でも弾んでもらいたい気分ですが、でも一緒にタコを囲んだ友人の頼みとあれば断るわけにはいけませんしね。
What a nice guy. Gonna be a bit on the quiet side tonight. Gotcha. Understandable. It's cool. Oishi grinned and pounded me on the back. It struck me that he just didn't want to jump ship rather than having any sort of sense of duty towards his job. Even so, that really didn't matter. Right now, I really appreciated the gesture.
早速出してもらえますか。
If the enemy knew that the police had obtained the wallet, then they would probably have moved the hostage to a different place. There wasn't a moment to lose, but Oishi, without regard to the fact that we were about to head out, began to remove his
何を
jacket.
知ってるんですか。
まあ用心ですよ。家中の栗を拾うなら相応の用意が必要と思いましてね。あなたも来ますよ。
What Oishi pulled from the drawer below the desk was a stab-proof vest. Oishi making sure ain't nobody doing any poking up in here. All right, back in a second. His name was John Cena. Da, 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 da. But he was also Toshiki Inugai, the grandson of the Minister of Construction, Inugai. There was only one reason for him being here. If he didn't include a gym or art class, his grades were above average. That was the result of him having private tutoring sessions twice a week. If you omitted the fact that he still couldn't do pull-ups, there wasn't much else that would make him hate school. Of course, he understood full well that his grandfather was a cabinet minister, but he also knew that not too many people were that interested in their relationship. He didn't like to go out of his way to bring up his grandfather or to call him the Minister of Construction. And finally, he at least tried to know a little more about what kind of work the Minister of Construction did than your average Joe. What that entailed was that when you tried your best to make his life better for the masses, sometimes you made a few enemies. He knew that all too well from the time he'd spent as class representative. His grandfather had many enemies. He knew that he might personally catch some of that fallout, so he had to think twice as cautious. He was taught that by his parents. That's why, the moment he was kidnapped, he instantly knew that this was one of those occasions. He understood that he wasn't being treated as Toshiki Inagai, the person, but rather as Toshiki Inagai, the grandson of the Minister of Construction. That he wasn't personally at fault, but this was the result of some unavoidable trouble with his grandfather's work. It had made little difference, but when he realized it wasn't because of anything he did, he was able to relax, if only a little. Of course, at first he was struck with terror befitting his age, wondering what was going to happen to him. But after a while of being tied up and only able to stay lying down, he began to ponder a great many things. First, he thought about the reason he was being abducted like this. He understood the answer to that easily. He was taken hostage to coerce his grandfather, the minister. There was no doubt about that. He didn't know exactly what the Minister of Construction did, but it was easy to imagine that there was much to be gained from them threatening him. He respected his grandfather more than most. He earnestly believed that his own grandfather was within the top 20 of the most important people in Japan. That was exactly why he wouldn't forgive anybody who tried to threaten his beloved grandfather. More importantly, he wouldn't forgive anybody who would use him as a tool to threaten his grandfather. His grandfather was really busy and rarely had time to meet with relatives. That's why, with what little time he did manage to scrape together, he just dropped by unannounced. And as an apology for not being able to meet during the New Year's or summer vacation, he doted on his grandson very, very much. The number of times that Toshiki was looked upon with disregard just because of his grandfather was a politician and a minister certainly weren't few. But he never thought even once that he wanted his grandfather to quit being a politician. Because it was his beloved grandfather, he wanted him to continue his career as long as possible from the bottom of his heart. However, Toshiki was now being held hostage, and his grandfather was being threatened. Jesus Christ, my throat! Give me a second. It really sucks how everything and any symptom you have right now is like, oh God, am I getting the COVID? It's like my throat's been messed up all day. It's been a little hard to breathe because of allergies. It's like, oh Jesus. Is that what's going on here? However, Toshiki was now being held hostage and his grandfather was being threatened. His grandfather, who called him the apple of his eye, was surely suffering. Yeah, I've been having that. It sucks. He might do anything to save his grandson, maybe even putting aside his ideology if it was required to save his grandson. He might cave into the culprit's demands if it meant saving his grandson. When Toshiki thought about that, an inexplicable anger welled up within him. In his current situation, he was unable to forgive the cowards who would make his beloved grandfather suffer by using such dastardly means. That feeling swelled up inside of him, displacing the fear. What he thought at first was something any boy would imagine. Get out of these bonds, beat up the bad guys, and hand them over to the police. Easy enough, you can do that. That's fine. Images of all the brave heroes from all the manga he read passed through the back of his mind. In his imaginary scenario, he slipped his bonds easily, floating like a butterfly to evade his captors, and then stinging like a bee to bring them all down. In the end, it was nothing more than his silly little fantasy, but with his vision obstructed and unable to see anything, it was something that he could get into more than any anime at the moment. In actuality, he was enjoying these little scenarios in his head for the long period of time he was tied up. His captors hadn't really done anything to him that they would feel sorry for. However, eventually he began to grow tired of his fantasies and more realistic scenarios began to run through his head. It was then he realized that none of them were a solution. Yes, he wanted to do something for his grandfather, who was being threatened. That he was being held there to inflict pain on his grandfather was the thing that he could least forgive, and also the most vexing. And then he noticed there was a much simpler way he could save his grandfather without having to beat up his despicable captors. That was to remove himself as a hostage from the hands of these villains. If he was to disappear from here, his captors would have nothing to threaten his grandfather with. The captors had restrained him, but they didn't treat him roughly, and they made sure that he was fed well enough. Meaning, at most, he was nothing more than the means for their threat. They weren't looking to bully or kill him out of spite. If he behaved, no ill would befall him. Realizing that gave him a strong sense of courage, and carrying his train of thought this far, he let it run its course to its natural conclusion. Right now, at this moment, Toshiki Inagai had decided to escape. His ears had been stuffed with sponge-like material, acting like a makeshift earplug. However, they didn't actually do much to block out any sound, as he could overhear everything his captors were saying. Realizing this was to his advantage, even when his captors spoke to him, he acted like he couldn't hear them due to the earplugs. His captors, thinking that he couldn't hear their conversation, talked about all sorts of things without any reservations. Thanks to that, he was able to obtain various pieces of information. First off, this wasn't Tokyo. It seemed like this was quite a distance away, and on top of that, in the countryside, nestled deep in the mountains. It also seemed that his captors were inconvenienced living out here, so he deduced that this place was far removed from any sort of town. Finally, whenever they went out to buy food or other supplies, they would always take a car. That fact caused him some dismay, because he knew that the method he learned from school of running around blindly while shouting for help wouldn't work here. He paused his little mental escape scenario there. His ultimate goal was to find somebody who would help him. If somebody who fit that description wasn't close by, his chances of escaping successfully grew slim. As a desolate, far-off land deep in the mountains, a place where you couldn't even go shopping without using a car, in this situation, escaping would be difficult. He grew depressed, and after a while, he returned to his original scenario, imagining becoming a hero like in the manga he read, and beating down his captors became his respite. His captors would have an 8-year-old girl to buy their cigarettes. Yeah, that's a good point. Look at that, we're dropping frames. Okay, fantastic. Everything was going right today. However, as he played out those delusions in his head, his heart, hating to surrender, continued to search for a way to escape, and then he thought of a way. If the goal was far away, then all he had to do was get closer. His goal, in a nutshell, was to find somebody who would help him. Cool, keep dropping frames, dude. It's fantastic, I love it. Oh my god. Everything's just gonna be great today, isn't it? Everything's just gonna be fantastic. Oh my god. His goal in a nutshell was to find somebody who would help him. In other words, somebody other than his captors. If he faked being sick, then his captors would have to take him to the hospital or bring a doctor to him. They would probably be reluctant to do that, but he already knew that the hostage was more important than anything. In the off chance that something happened, like him dying occurred, they wouldn't be able to threaten anybody anymore. Luckily, he had an experience that would help him fake a serious illness. At the end of last year, he was inadvertently involved in a car accident and had to undergo surgery. The scar from that surgery was still clearly visible on his lower torso. He recalled the pain and suffering from that time. The existence of this experience would make a huge impact on the realism of his performance. He was quite confident in his ability to fake an illness. His captor's first look is a sign that he needed to use the washroom. Tying his arms, they tried to bring him there while he was still blindfolded, but he didn't try to get up. His hands now free, only clutched at his abdomen as he writhed in
おい
agony.
どうしたんだ腹でも痛いのか
He still had earplugs in, so he had to pretend he didn't hear that his captors were asking the question. He was about to nod, so he hurriedly tried to stop
どった
himself.
んね
小僧が腹を押さえてるよ腹痛かな
His captors looked down at his suffering form for a bit. One of them proposed a course of action while the other laid doubts that Toshiki might be
どっ
faking
た
it.
んね坊主腹痛むんかい
そいつ耳を塞いでるから聞こえてないぜ
参ったんな腹痛に効く薬なんかあらんね薬局行って買ってくるか
腹痛って言ったっていろんな薬があるだろう症状がわからないうちはいい加減な薬は買えないぜ
腹押さえてるし便秘やん便秘薬でも買ってくれば収まるやんね
There you go. All he's gotta do is just take a bit of a dookie. It'll be
間
fine.
違って飲んでも死なんしな
決めつけるなよ盲腸とかかもしれないだろう俺のおじさんがさあれはかなりビビったぜ
One of the captors leaned over beside the boy, who was bent over in
か
agony.
わいそうにな全身汗だらけじゃないかよ腹か痛むのかおいおい痛むんならあんまり抑え込んじゃかえって悪いぞ
Realizing that his captors were concerned about his stomach, he inadvertently let his shirt right up, letting the scar from his surgery come into plain view. His vision was still obscured with the packing tape, so he couldn't see their reaction to the scar, but his captors were taken aback, and judging from their momentary silence, he had obtained that it was the reaction he was looking for.
やばいぜこの手術跡そんなに昔のものじゃないぜ
その小僧熱出てるんかいね体温計あるん
あるわけねえよでもすごい汗だぜおでこは結構熱いと思う緊張状態が続くとさ昔の傷なんかに応えたりするって聞いたことあるぜ
じゃあどうすんよ薬じゃ治らんちゅんてんか
何の手術跡か知らねえけどとにかくまずいだろ下手すると命に関わるぜ
まずいんてこれ本当にまずいんて
医者に見せた方がいいこのままじゃ突然ぽっくりいっちまう可能性だってあるだろう
Toshiki ate a guy who's, with those few words, knew that the situation was progressing exactly as he had envisioned it, and snickering to himself on the inside, pressed his act even further. He didn't even need to see to know that his captors were panicked and were running around like chickens with their heads cut off at this troublesome turn of events.
診療所連れて行くか
そりゃまずん先生を連れてくる方がいいね
入江の先生かいいのか大丈夫か
人質に何かあったらまずんねしゃあない緊急事態やん
One of the captors hurriedly left in the car. Another of the men, completely shaken up at this point, wiped the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. It looked like they were bringing a doctor. As long as the doctor wasn't an accomplice, the doctor was his goal. He was someone he should seek help from. His captors were probably wary of that happening. They would be prepared for it. This would all come down to luck. Some of the sweat emerging from his brow was from that nervousness. At that moment, the packing tape covering his eyes and ears was torn off. The burning light that he was seeing for the first time in several days hurt his eyes. After that, the gag that made it hard to breathe was also
大
removed.
丈夫かこそ今お医者を連れてくるからなしばらく我慢してろな
The doctor was coming. The doctor was coming. Now, how was he going to ask for help, and how was he going to get away from his captors? A plethora of his thoughts began swirling around in his
分かっ
mind.
てると思うがお医者に余計なことは言うなよ俺たちも別にお前に乱暴がしたいわけじゃないんだそりゃ分かってるよな
Toshiki Inigai nodded while feigning pain and obedience. His expectations and the enemy's expectations. Whether they doubted he was faking his illness or not, they knew what his goal was, and would try to stop it. His stomach contracted from the stress of his gambit, making it seem like his stomach was really starting to hurt. No, it really was, but there was no reason to panic. If he failed in his approach to the doctor, there would be nothing to lose. If there was something to lose in this, it was this method of faking illness to get in touch with the doctor. If he could think of the other methods from here on out, it wasn't much. But at the present, this was the easiest and most dramatic way he could think of. The more he thought about it, the more it looked like this was his first and last gambit. Eventually, he heard the sound of a car approaching once again, the sound of the doors being hurriedly open and shut, the sounds of several footsteps approaching. A young man in a white medical coat arrived. Hello, young man in white medical coat. How are you? As he acknowledged the boy, a suspicious look showed itself on his face.
彼は
村の子じゃありませんね。
He's Young Doctor. It's his rap name. The captors didn't respond. From the looks of it, the young doctor had realized that this was an abnormal situation. One of the captors talked threateningly.
先生には関係のないことです。
For a while, the doctor and the captors silently glared at one another. However, unable to stand the sight of the boy continuing to suffer, the doctor, as the captors had hoped, didn't press any further.
その古い手術跡というのが何の手術でしたか？
そりゃわからないです。
本当は診療所に連れ帰るべきなんですがね。
先生、そりゃさすがにちょっと。
The doctor said he wanted to bring the boy back to the clinic, but the captors simply silently shook their heads at the notion. It was a fleeting hope, but it was only natural that the captors would refuse. At that moment, his eyes met with the doctor's. Seeing that the boy's painful state was abnormal, the doctor suspected it was a serious illness.
大丈夫ですか？
Hi there!
私は医者です。この手術跡はいつ頃のものですか？
去年の冬に事故で。
事故？そうですか。参ったな。
He couldn't let the doctor figure out that he was faking it here. He had to somehow figure out a way to keep this going and tell the doctor that he was being confined and needed help.
患部を少し触りますよ。痛むところがあったら言ってくださいね。
Seeing that it was extremely painful, the doctor crossed his arms and began to ponder. He had to somehow get himself to a hospital. To Toshiki Itagai, faking that illness was the performance of a lifetime. Whoosh.
Eh, 皆さんもご苦労さんなことです。お暑いでしょうが、せいぜい頑張ってくださいよ。不法投棄のダンプが現れたらすぐにご連絡ください。
What did I tell this chat about illegal dumps last time? I do not endorse illegal dumps, so no illegal dumps out there in Chatland. I better not hear about it.
急行いたしますのでね。
ご協力感謝しますよ、大石さん。どうぞ。
Exactly. You've got to get those dumps certified. It's very important. Only legal dumps in this chat. A gap wide enough for a single car was opened up in the barricade. Oishi, showing his gratitude or perhaps a threatening attitude, with a short beep of the horn, rolled the car forward through the checkpoint. This time my appearance was the very embodiment of the word suspicious. A baseball cap, mask, and sunglasses. On top of that, even though it was sweltering, I was wearing a hoodie. Any respectable police officer would be loath to not stop me for questioning. I had meant to be overcautious, knowing full well that my face was known. But it might have already been too late for that to be of any use. Using that as an excuse, I doffed the unbearably hot hoodie and windbreaker, ripped off the mask and the hat, and threw them in the seat behind me.
ありゃいいんですか？
こんな小細工したところでどうせ割れているでしょうから。
そりゃまあそうでしょうな。
Oishi, probably thinking that my unexpected behavior was funny, continued to laugh. The beautiful and pristine scenery of Hinamizawa spread out before me. The village itself would have been quite beautiful if it weren't for the complicated circumstances surrounding it at the moment. I would absolutely love to take Yukie here for a drive one day. Come to think of it, I didn't get a chance to call her last night. I played around with the idea in my head, but in reality this village wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. I had heard everything from the prefectural headquarters. At the heart of this village was the intelligence network that the three families wielded was, due to blood ties and regional relationships, unbelievably well organized. Their net spread not just around Hinamizawa itself, but encapsulated the entirety of the city of Shishibone as well. When I first heard that, somewhere in the recesses of my mind, I didn't take it completely seriously. How could a local organization out in the boonies have something so grandiose? I couldn't deny that somewhere in the back of my mind I had ridiculed that thought. But not only were they really threatening the minister, they had demonstrated that they had complete grasp on our movements, which were supposed to be top secret. They were almost like the secret police that controlled a small Eastern European country, like in some spy novel. The villagers wouldn't bat an eye at getting their hands dirty if it meant fighting the damn project. I also heard something like that from the prefectural headquarters. Now that you mention it, when I first arrived here, Oishi also said that this place was a war zone, didn't he? The residents of this village were at the same time freedom fighters, although by definition they were no different than guerrillas or a militia. They were protected by the Geneva Convention, but they also didn't have to adhere to those rules either. This place was more of a quagmire than a legitimate battlefield. A secret war was unfolding. I could drive along because Oishi was with me. But if I was to leave this car for even something as trivial as looking for a vending machine, there was a chance I wouldn't return. Even though a single shot hadn't been fired, this was a battlefield. No, the reason why bullets weren't flying was simply because it was hard for a civilian to obtain a gun in Japan. So they were probably just equipped with weapons other than guns that were easy to obtain. That was why Oishi was wearing the stab-proof vest, wasn't he?
赤坂さん、緊張してます。
The fact that I was apprehensive was, of course, picked up on by Oishi. If he already figured it out, there was no point in trying to deny or
もちろん
hide
で
it.
す。敵の本拠地にたった2人で乗り込んでいるんですよ。この人数では万一の時が不安です。
Except Mion, right?
万一の時？
Only person in Hinamizawa that has a gun.
大丈夫ですよ。
この村の人間すべてが敵ではありませんでしたか。全員が口裏を合わせればこの村で白昼堂々殺人が起こっても証拠一つ残らない、そういうところだと聞いていますよ。
That was what the ironclad rule of not barging into Yakuza office alone was about. If there wasn't a neutral party involved, the area wasn't bound by the laws of common sense. If something happened, you wouldn't be able to prove it, and there wasn't anybody who would take your side. It was pretty much the definition of poking the
南
bear.
沢地区へ向かうと同僚に言い残してますしね。万一の時は無線機もありますし、赤坂さんが怖がってるほどね、そう簡単には完全犯罪はできませんよ。まあもちろん油断をしないに越したことはありませんがね。赤坂さん、緊張しすぎですよ。前にご一緒してた時の方がリラックスしてらしたじゃないですか。な
Laughing it off, Oishi thumped his chest and grinned, as if to say I could depend on him.
まあ本当にヤバくなったら桜の大門にはこいつがありますからね。
Oishi made a motion by sticking out his index finger. It was undoubtedly the image of a
役
gun.
に立ちますか。
撃った後の後始末云々が怖くなければ実に心強いですよ。
An officer's gun was only for show. If you really wanted to fire it, there was quite a number of stipulations, and you had to be prepared for the long probationary period afterward. It definitely wasn't worth it, so even if an officer did unholster his gun, there wasn't one who would actually wanted to pull the trigger, unless they were American. And then they very specifically joined the police force so that they could do that. But I'm sure the police brutality is nothing that is very, it's not unique. It's not unique to America.
赤坂さんは持ってるんですか？これ。
まあ、一応。
撃ったことは？
ありますよ。訓練で、ですがね。
そりゃそうでしょうな。
なら大石さんにはあるんですか？
私ですか？ね。まさかあるわけないじゃないですか。
What was this? I thought he was laughing at me because he had experience. The two of us laughed together.
銃口を向けたこともありませんがね。銃口を向けられたことなら何度かありますよ。銃口を覗かされるだけで寿命が3年は縮むな。
Even if he had never fired a gun before, you couldn't even begin to compare the amount of experience Oishi had over me. At a time like this, I can only marvel again at how reliable Oishi seemed.
そういえば日の高いうちにこっちには来たくなかったな。でも車道はここを抜ける以外にないし。赤坂さん、念のためもう一回マスクで顔を隠してください。
どうしたんです？
冷房がうるさいから聞こえないかな。切りますよ。窓を開けてみてください。
When I opened the window, a blast of hot air blew inside, and then I could hear angry yelling coming from far away. At that moment, the forest gave way to either side of us, and our view expanded suddenly. And there could be seen the Hinamizawa Dam construction grounds, the very front line of the Hinamizawa village. The crackling blare of someone's voice sounded over an enormous loudspeaker. The roar of angry voices continued to rumble. The incredible volume had become a veritable sound cannon, spewing out its ammunition. Oh, obviously. I imagine it's more of a full ski mask kind of thing, though. The prefabricated site office was surrounded by two sets of high fences laced with barbed wire. Lined up in behind those fences were riot police and other vehicles. And surrounding it all were the villagers. They howled out their protests against the dam as a single entity.
今日は少ないですね。ついてます。
少ないんですか？
ええ、多い時だと道路までいっぱいになりますよ。うちうち車も通れません。
At first, due to their overwhelming intensity, it looked to me like there was more people than there actually was, but upon closer inspection, there were at most 50 to 70 of them. But the 6 or 7 propaganda trucks lined up that looked like they belonged to a band of thugs were a strange enough sight. The villagers were also wearing helmets and bandanas, as well as covering their faces with masks, adding to the oddity of it all. The propaganda trucks, after braying their chorus, had their volume turned up even higher and began to flood the area with sutras. To say that the noise was downright violent wouldn't be an understatement. From this distance, it was still this loud. The glass in the office was probably rattling from the noise.
あれをガンガンやられるとたまんないんですよね。昨日の連中全員耳栓してて、それでも耳がおかしくなるそうです。気の毒な話です。
騒音規制でなんとかできないんですか？
うちの県には騒音規制に関する規定ね。それにほら、お経でしょ。宗教活動規制できないし、連中も頭いいんです。ね。
Is what I think Oishi said. Actually, no matter how tightly the window was shut, the booming sound of the sutras still filled the car. I couldn't even hear what Oishi, who was sitting right next to me, was saying. As the car approached the line of propaganda trucks, the blare became difficult to bear. It wasn't enough to just plug my ears with my fingers. I had to hold my head to keep my skull from splitting apart. If I had seen this terrifying energy sooner, I would have probably understood that Hinamizawa village was much quicker. No, I knew. They wouldn't blink an eye at sacrificing themselves in order to protect their hometown. Ah, so goddamn noisy. Shut up, shut up, shut up. My head throbbed. It felt like it was going to split apart. My eardrums crackled. And on top of it all, I felt like I was going to throw up. With the road crowded with the throng of squatters, the propaganda trucks, and the riot police's vehicles, it was in no way easy to get by. Even if you tried to shoo the squatters with the car horn, they were also wearing earplugs, oblivious to the noises from the outside world, and wouldn't easily move. The car could only inch forward at a snail's pace. Even then, the car eventually got through, starting to leave the tumultuous noise behind.
ほら、昨日一緒に麻雀やったメンツにお年寄りさんいたでしょ。覚えてます？
I remember that he was an older person that didn't exactly mince words. That guy has a Oishi-san called Old
いらっしゃいま
Man.
したね。
彼ね、第一航空の現場監督さんなんですよ。あそこのプレハブの中でイライラしながら仕事をなさってるんでしょうね。お気の毒なことです。
あれが毎日ではたまったものではないでしょう。
耐えかねて辞めちゃう人が後を絶ちません。まあ、その度にお給金がアップしてるんで何とも言えませんが。
Even having to deal with all the noise and hostility, they still made a wage that Oishi found enviable.
ちっくしょう、こいつら。聞こえてるのか聞こえてないのか。
A group of squatters were in the way of the car. Oishi, sufficiently annoyed, laid on the horn, but there was no indication that they were moving anytime soon. In this din, they could not even hear a car horn, or did they hear it and were just being malicious? If there were any riot police nearby, they would have made people move, but it just so happened that there weren't any around here.
もう、ちょいと待っててください。
Oishi opened up the door. The hot air and an even more heated roar of the crowd spilled into the car. Oishi said something and he grinned widely, but I couldn't hear what it was. He was getting them to move. Something like that. Oishi stepped out of the car and closed the door. The din faded slightly. I stared blankly as Oishi headed toward the group and started some conversation. Maybe we'd find the minister's grandson at Takatsudo. At the very least, I wanted him to be there. Find him, slip the cursed bonds of this incomprehensible village. I could only pray. At that moment, a shadow was suddenly cast over me. Somebody was standing right outside the passenger side window, blocking the sunlight. I spun around, looked up, and realized who the backlit figure was. Hello. Hello, what are you doing here? What are you doing here, Rika Smalls? What are you doing? It was a girl. It was Rika Furude. The girl stared down at me with a bored look in her eyes. I didn't have any justification for it, but I felt like I had been found by somebody I shouldn't have been found by. To fill the silence, I raised my hand as I mouthed a meek greeting. Of course, there was no way she heard my small voice in this clamor. Yeah, exactly. Shouldn't you be in school? Give me just a second here. Boop. I gotta change something. Alright. Sorry about that. Oh, God. Organization. What is that? What is organizing? I don't know what the hell that means. Right, but even then, she didn't even seem... Oh my God, learn to fucking read. But even then, she should have seen me wave my hand in greeting. In spite of that, she simply stared down at me with a cold look on her face. At that moment, the noise and heat spread through the car once again. Oishi had returned to the driver's seat. Taking a look, the group that were blocking the road had started to move aside while glaring our
お
way.
待たせしました。行きましょうか。ん
Oishi registered the figure of the girl behind me. One of the villagers came over and picked her up. In a manner of, it's dangerous, so get away. It was that she was whispered one or two words, however, I couldn't hear any.
さて、飛ばしますよ。もちろん、法定速度遵守で。
As if to shake off the still audible angry voices, Oishi floored the gas. Along with the roar of the din and the shouting, the villagers and the girl quickly disappeared
こ
behind
の
us.
先を抜けると高津戸地区です。銃撃戦の覚悟は大丈夫ですか？安全装置外すの土壇場でとちらないでくださいよ。
Sure, it'll be fun. Oishi laughed mockingly again. I was more concerned with what the girl had said, however, I was vaguely bothered by it. What was she trying to say with that apathetic and candid expression?
今から緊張したって仕方ないですよ。むしろ収穫がなくて勇み足って可能性だって十分にあるんですから。
But there was no longer a way to confirm that the girl had tried to tell me. It might have been that the girl who warned me to go back to Tokyo again, or else, was saying to me that who was here now, ignoring that warning.
警告したのにバカなやつ。
I had a feeling she said something like that. Why would she do that? Why would she say something mean like that? That is very mean, little girl. I'm gonna go refill a water. I'll be right back. Yeah, stay hydrated, especially if your fucking throat is a goddamn desert today. This doesn't bode well for us going much past this chapter, by the way. We're probably going to keep it to a 90-minute stream because my throat is literally just fucking burning right now. It really sucks. And I've got to do a very long podcast tomorrow, so it's not going to be wise for me to try and shotgun as much of this as I thought we would. So we're just going to have to take it easy. If you were to call Hanazawa a rather lonely village, then Takatsudo was outright desolate. For your everyday city boy like me, I just couldn't understand why anybody would force themselves to live here. There were signs that people had, but they were all covered in dust or enveloped in ivy, indicating that it was all
こんなところ
abandoned.
にも人は住んでいたんですね。
まあ昔の話でしょうな。こんな偏僻なとこじゃ年寄りには辛いですし、若者だってもう少しまともな土地に住みたいでしょうしね。後を継ぐ者がいなきゃ最後にはこうなるってことでしょうな。
Even if I had no personal attachment to the village, seeing the disused buildings made me feel a little bit sentimental. It seemed that Oishi had also felt the same way.
こんなところで財布が発見されたんですか。財布の取得者もよくこんなに偏僻なところに通りかかったものですね。
ああ、村人には山の中に畑を持ってる連中がいましてね。そういう連中は朝晩ここを通りますから。
畑仕事の村人たちは早朝や夕方にここを徒歩で通ると。
まさか行けるところまでは車で行くでしょうな。
早朝や夕方にこんなところを走行して落ちているたった一つの財布を発見できます。
できたんでしょうな。
取得者はどこで取得したと言っていますか。
もう少し先を行ったところにある茂みです。取得者はたまたまお腹が痛くなってちょいと茂みで用を足そうと思ったらしい。
Thank you for the resub, Taylor. Much appreciated. 35 months straight. Look at that thing go.
それで偶然見つけたらしいんですよ。中にちり紙でも入ってるのを期待したんですかね。
話ができすぎているように感じます。財布発見の当初からそういう違和感が拭えません。
I expressed that feeling that I had from the start of the day, quite frankly. It seemed too good to be true, but it was unwavering proof. But it was too perfect, sickeningly so. That was my
で
feeling.
きすぎってな、案外当たってるかもしれませんよ。
というと、
実は四課のお友達からちょいと聞いたんですがね、園崎お涼が大臣の孫の誘拐事件について言及したって話なんです。
言及した？
大臣の孫ももう誘拐されてから何日にもなってかわいそうだ。そろそろ解放されるといいなと。そう、お涼のばあさんが縁側でぼそりとつぶやいたってな話らしいんです。で、そのぼそりが園崎家の裏の裏のあちこちに
We
伝え
saw
られて
this
る
in
よ
the
うで
last
す。
tip last night. Right, I heard something earlier from Sato-san, the informant. When the leader Oryo had a concern, somebody in the family would be considerate.
つまりそれは実質上の人質解放命令ですか。
私はそう見てます。この出来すぎの財布発見は孫を警察に引き渡すためのイベントじゃないかと。
どうして人質の解放を？
そりゃ人質を解放するなんて理由は一つしかないじゃないですか。
なんです？
取引の成立ですよ。ひなみ沢ダム計画の中止を大臣が約束ってことですかね。
ダム計画なんて必ずなくなっちゃいますのです。
At that moment, those words that the girl had said resurfaced in the back of my mind. In the end, it was turning out exactly as she'd proclaimed. The young girl knew the circumstances. She knew everything about the kidnapping incident, and from the beginning to the end.
赤坂、
The girl unexpectedly called my
なんで？
name.
東京へ帰れ。
Huh?
あなたはもう幾ばくもしないうちにこの村、それがあまりにもみすぼらしくて気の毒な姿だから。
He is a very hard character to nail down, honestly. Like, it's hard to pin down exactly, like, what he's saying is being said in jest or is being said out of experience or fear. It's really hard to gauge him. He's one of the harder characters to really pin down.
今のうちから 警告してあげているのです。
どうして？
いちいちうるさいな。あなたの親はあなたが赤信号の横断歩道の真ん中にいるとき、どうして危ないのかを全部説明し終えるまであなたの手を引っ張らないの？引っ張るでしょ。まず歩道まで連れ戻してからなぜ危険なのかを解くでしょう。つまりはそういうこと。
The girl who knew everything from start to finish had warned me in the beginning, go back to Tokyo.
赤坂の怖がり。
孫は無事見つかるでしょうが、その後はいろいろと厄介な問題になるでしょうな。どう厄介になるかは一警察官の私には想像もつきませんがね。
フルでリカって少女ご存知ですか？
What I had said was such a non sequitur that Oishi sat stunned in silence for a
も
while.
ちろん知ってますよ。御三家の一つ、フルデ家の一人娘ですね。
どういう少女なんです？
おやおや、これは意外な人物名にちょっと驚きです。公安ではフルデ家が臭いと睨んでおられるわけで、私にも情報を分けてくださいよ。
いや、そういうのじゃないんです。ちょっと気になったもので。
まあいいや。同じ卓を囲んだ友人の質問なら答えないわけにはいきませんからね。
友人と呼んでいただけて光栄です。
で、あのお嬢ちゃんはね、まあ村のマスコットみたいなもんです。村中の誰からも愛されてます。中でも年寄り連中には特に崇められてましてね。
崇められる？
よくは知らないんですがね、フルデ家に生まれた女の子ってのには多少神聖な意味合いがあるらしいんですよ。ひなみ沢の土着信仰ですがね、お社様の生まれ変わりだとかなんとか、そんな話があるらしいですよ。
お社様。そういえば同盟の登り旗の中にお社様と書かれたものがあったような気がします。何ですか、お社様って？
ひなみ沢の守り神様の名前です。村にあだなす者に罰を当てるって信じられてましてね。まあそんな便利な神様がいたらダムの連中はとっくに神罰にやられているんでしょうが、幸い今日までその罰ってやつは一つも起こってませんがね。
村にあだなす大臣の孫がお社様の怒りに触れ、なんて言いましたっけ？そう、鬼隠し。大臣の孫を鬼隠しにしたと、そういう筋書きになるわけでしょうか？
なるほどな。そういうことになるんでしょうな。
Yo, June, how's it
お
going?
社様が下した神罰なら、犯人はお社様の生まれ変わりである。
Even I didn't know exactly what I was saying. The fact that Oishi laughed it off was a bit of a relief. Oishi's joyous laughter was so infectious that I began to laugh like an idiot as well. How's the investigation going?
Yeah.
We found a wallet. And I guess we're heading out to where the kid's probably gonna be. Oishi, after laying onto the horn several times, rolled the window down and leaned out, waving his arm in an exaggerated manner. It was a car headed the opposite way. Until now, we hadn't run into any other cars except our own. And of all places, it was at this desolate location. It seemed like Oishi knew the owner of the car. The other car also chirped its horn and came to a stop.
入江の先生、こんにちは。
The other car's window rolled down slowly, revealing a young man in a white overcoat. He was about my age, perhaps a bit older, but you really can't judge somebody by their
大石
appearance.
さんじゃありませんか。こんにちは。 珍しいところでお会いしますね。
そりゃこっちのセリフですよ、先生。まさかこんなところで会うとはね。どうしたんです？
いえね、ちょっとした往診です。
ありゃ、そうですか。休館とかでしたか。
いえ、そんなに大したことではありませんでした。よかったですよ。
お医者の世話にならずに済むならそれに越したことはないです。
ではこれで。急いで戻らないとスタッフに怒られますんで。
診療所長さんも大変です。ではでは、お気をつけて。
The young doctor named Irie, after gesturing his farewell, drove forwards and then soon disappeared around the corner. Oishi also drove forwards, but soon came to a stop again. He pulled out a worn map book from the dash. His expression didn't have an ounce of irreverence. He was perfectly serious.
今日は診療所は往診の日じゃないはずです。よっぽどの休館か、特殊な事情のある患者ということになりますね。
We are well past Hinamizawa at this point. We are way past the mountains. Like, we are out in the middle of nowhere, past nowhere. Oishi flipped through the pages, opening up the map of Takatsudo. After that, he took a look around and started to figure out what our current location was.
その休館が怪しいということですか？
言ったでしょう。高津戸地区にね、住んでる人なんてほとんどいないんですよ。今私たちがいる道はここ。入江先生はこの道に対して。
Having no sense of our surroundings, I couldn't digest anything about the place. He was indicating on the map.
私たちは財布の取得場所を目指しています。ちなみに取得場所はここ。でもね、高津戸地区にわずかにある民家に向かうには、そもそも道が違うんです。
つまり入江医師は民家のない方角から来たと。
山間の段々畑で農作業中に誰かが倒れたってのでない限りね、人が倒れて医者が呼ばれたら普通は連れ帰って詳しく調べるもんです。でもさっき理恵医師は大したことはなかったと言いましたね。車には他には誰も乗っていなかったようですし。
Oishi putting it together. Oishi didn't say anything more than that. I also said nothing more. The doctor just now examined a patient. Close by. Only that. The noisy radio had suddenly gone quiet. The sky had just as suddenly turned an oppressive color. As Oishi knew that it might start to rain, a torrential downpour started, as though trying not to disappoint him. Eventually, Oishi stopped the car. The only sounds of the brake to break the silence were the percussion of the rain on the roof and the spot squeak on the windshield wipers.
ちょいと静かで行きましょうかね。
Saying that in a quiet voice, he exited the car without an umbrella, careful not to make any noise. Oishi leaned over, indicating the other side of the thicket. He was pointing at a prefabricated shed and a car that was parked beside it. The car looked obviously well cared for. It wasn't a vehicle that had been left there for several years.
営林署の機材小屋です。夏場以外は利用されてないと聞きました。
あの車は営林署の職員。
さあね、公用車には見えないですね。
Oishi was playing it cool, but my nervousness was gradually increasing.
一応は念のため。
Saying that, Oishi returned to the car. I thought he was going to get an umbrella, but he grabbed the onboard radio instead.
もしもし、大石です。聞こえてるかな？こんにちは、こんにちは。
This guy sounds like a delight to have on dispatch.
はい、沖宮 PS。大石さん、感度良好です。どうぞ。
今、高津戸地区の営林署機材小屋前です。矢後地に向かう方じゃないよ。南沢から高津戸に入る方の。
はい、確認しました。
小屋に不審者。これより職質します。5分で連絡なかったら駐在所に連絡と 大至急応援パトを送ってください。よろしくお願いします。
了解しました。
じゃあ行ってみましょうかね。
I thought that said cow workers for a second because of the typo. Raven works on a farm, apparently. Since he was first confined here, he had heard the sound of a car multiple times, so he just thought the far-off sound was more of the same. However, the reaction from the captors was, until now, something he hadn't seen before. They jumped, reacting as if shocked by a jolt of electricity, and pressed against the window, cautiously peering outside.
営林署の人間まずいぜ。
いや、警察やんな。
One of the captors lifted the boy by his collar and pressed the blade against his cheek.
お兄ちゃん、ちょい静かにしてるな。分かってると思うけど、大声出したりすると大変なことになるからな。
Toshiki Inagai was sure that the doctor had reported things to the police. He had felt relief when he thought that he was safe, but not imagining that his captors would resort to violence when they were cornered. His anxiety remained
どうする？
unabated.
時間稼いでる。小僧連れてちょい裏から抜けな。ほとぼり冷めたら落ち合おう。
One of the perpetrators grabbed the boy by the collar and forced him to stand. Of course, Toshiki Inagai tried to resist by feigning that his illness had been aggravated by the rough treatment, but his captors paid no heed. The door was violently banged upon. What a gloriously uplifting way to just greet people you're trying to arrest. Maybe you should work with cows. Yeah, maybe. The door was banged on again. Toshiki Inagai hesitated for a moment to respond to that voice by yelling. However, while he was being indecisive, his mouth was covered, taking that option away from him. The leader of the captors waved at the other to go. The younger perpetrator nodded in response, and while keeping the boy's mouth covered, started heading toward the back door.
はいはい。何かご用かいね。
どうも。警察ですがね。ここちょっと開けてもらっていいですか。急な雨で困っちゃいましてね。
ええ、今開けます。
The moment the lock was undone, Oishi forced the door open. And with a gleam of menace in his eyes, he pushed the man aside as he stepped into the room. Then, in the small empty room, he was able to quickly discern that the boy he was looking for was nowhere to be seen.
あれ？私はここは営林署の機材倉庫だって聞いてたんですけどね。何にもありませんね。
There was nothing inside the room that would indicate this was an equipment shed. There was only a mountain of blankets indicating that somebody was sleeping here alongside empty food packets strewn about.
ああ、ここはずいぶん前から空っぽさね。
Yo, Sour, how's it going?
機材がしまってあるところなんて。
でも営林署の建物でしょ。あんた営林署の人。
あんたこそ誰？警察？
The two of them glared at each other suspiciously. But Oishi and the man steadfastly refused to reveal their identity before the other did. The man, judging from the sharp look in Oishi's eyes, realized that it would be hard to talk his way out of this one. No matter what he said, the most time he could buy would be probably only a few dozen seconds. Only the sound of the rain filled the tense moment. Just then, they heard the sound of a struggle from far off. Oishi had a hunch. There was no doubt that Akasaka, who was circling around back, had run into the perpetrators who were still trying to slip away. As Oishi thought that, the man in front of him reacted much faster. The man swung an attack much more intended to obscure Oishi's vision rather than actually hit him in the face. Seizing his opportunity, the man aimed a kick at Oishi's groin without any hesitation, but he missed his mark and was unable to land the critical blow. The man trying to pin Oishi grabbed him from the base of his neck with both hands and fiercely tried to push him down. But as Oishi fell backwards as if kicking the man upwards, he dug his foot into the man's midsection. With that leg acting as a fulcrum, the man was flung by the falling Oishi as if at the circle throw. The two of them squared off in the pouring rain.
面白いじゃないの。俺とやろうってか。ね。
I mean, I would not fuck with Oishi. This man seems like he can go. Oishi, as if trying to cheer himself on, grinned smugly. He then stood up while brushing the mud off of himself. Even though he countered the assault, Oishi was getting up rather awkwardly compared to the man who he threw, who swiftly sprang to his feet. Akasaka's voice rang out from a distance. Judging from the distress in his voice, he was already engaged in a fight and warned Oishi to reconvene with him. But Oishi's hands were full as well.
Akasaka-san! 申し訳ない! ちょっと待っててくださいよ!
The man raised both fists in a stance and hinted to him being acquainted with karate or some sort of form of martial art. Of course, Oishi, as an officer of the law, was decently versed in judo. He also had the moxie to have been through his fair share of fights before. Because of that, he could tell the man in front of him was quite a bit better at fighting than he was. Ah, damn it. Thinking that this was going to be easy just because the order came from the Sonozaki family to release the hostage had been a big mistake.
なかなか上等じゃないの。久々に胃液が込み上げてくる感じがします。
Gunfu? Yeah, more like it. Oishi played off the situation like it was no sweat. His opponent, seeing his attitude, took that to mean that Oishi wasn't going to go down easily. The man wildly charged forward, attempting to grab Oishi. If the man managed a successful clinch from his low stance, Oishi would be tackled to the ground and end up being mounted. It was something you saw often when children fought, but it really was a bad position since you couldn't do much once you were in it. Oishi, responding to that move, lowered his stance to collide with the man head-on. The moment they clashed, Oishi grabbed the man's lapel. As he yanked the lapel upwards, he smashed the man's solar plexus with an elbow with the same arm. It was a move from Oishi's own personal brand of brawling judo. He then grabbed on with his free hand and attempted to throw his opponent with both hands, but the man lowered the center of gravity and swung his arms in a large arc, entwining them with Oishi. Not only that, but he had forced both of Oishi's elbows to the outside, and Oishi, now in an awkward position, was in danger of exposing his back with his hands still clutching the man's chest. This guy practiced Aikido or grappling, didn't he? Oishi, cursing the fact that his fingers were twisted in the man's shirt and couldn't get away, released his grip. But he was still in an awkward position of being bent over. And to top it off, he had zero range. This man was able to read Oishi's movements completely as he tried to squirm his way into a better position. And then he took the palms of his hands and swiftly clapped them over both of Oishi's ears. That fucking hurts. I've had that done. That fucking hurts. Clapping the ears in any other martial art except self-defense was basically forbidden. Karate and Judo didn't recognize it as a legal technique. It was that much of a simple and dangerous attack. Oishi raised both of his hands as he tried to reflexively clutch his own ears, but before that could happen, the man wrapped his arms around Oishi's neck. His thick biceps clenched firmly around the base of Oishi's neck like a vice. Oishi instinctively thought he was going to be killed. After all, it wasn't hard to believe that a man like this, who was accustomed to fighting, could crush his opponent's neck from this position. But his opponent didn't do that. He had chosen to keep his hold and force Oishi to lose consciousness. That's why Oishi, at that moment, even though his face was twitching, was grinning wildly. Even though his opponent had a chance to kill him, he didn't choose to. He was thinking, this guy has no intention of killing me. However, even though that might be the case, the man's hold on his neck was by no means gentle. In no time at all, Oishi's consciousness began to fade. Having that experience of being taken down countless times in judo during his student days, Oishi was utterly resigned to the fact that it was over. Akasaka was finally recovering from the intense pain of being kicked in a rather sensitive area. He had bumped into the captor carrying the boy in the back entrance. He had seen Toshiki Inagai's picture plenty of times, but wasn't able to immediately ascertain that the boy in front of him was the real deal, with his mouth covered in packing tape. Also, with his limited experience, it wasn't hard for him to panic over how to deal with it. It was hard for him not to... It was hard for him... My god. Also, with his limited experience, it wasn't hard for him to panic over how to deal with the situation. Of course, the perpetrator didn't overlook this momentary lapse. His kick landed squarely in a critical spot, with Akasaka even having time to call for help. The man flung the boy over his shoulder and headed towards the front of the shed, but upon hearing Oishi's bellowing voice, he gave up going that direction. He then dashed off towards the forest. As if the weight of the boy slung over his shoulder wasn't even there. Akasaka was lost for a moment. Meeting up with Oishi, who was fighting with the enemy, was by far the safer option, but he couldn't just lose sight of the fleeing man. Akasaka stood and chased after the captor's back. He ran through a short thicket, branches of fallen leaves crunching underfoot. The tips of the branches raked and clawed at him, small scratches inscribing themselves on his body one after another. He kept on stepping into puddles of mud, and his shoes were soon filled with murky water. For Akasaka, traveling through his unexplored forest was, even though this was an emergency situation, extremely unpleasant. As he said that, he regretted it immediately, as if it was but a waste of breath. There wasn't a thief in the world that would politely stop when told by the police. To a city boy like Akasaka, running through this forest was an arduous task. However, it must have been no easy task either for the man carrying the minister's grandson. He neither gained nor lost ground in his pursuit. Akasaka, upon realizing that, gained back a bit of composure. Just keep on chasing him. We were running in the same conditions. In fact, the man running with an awkward stride was at far more of a disadvantage. They couldn't run forever. Eventually, he'd definitely trip and fall. As long as he was being hounded, he would definitely stumble. Soon his wish was fulfilled. The man who had stepped into something and lost his balance was no longer able to bear the weight of the boy, dropping him. Akasaka, in all honesty, didn't care about the perpetrator at all, just as long as he could ensure the safety of Toshiki Inagai. So if the perpetrator ran off by himself, it was perfectly acceptable, but it seemed that Toshiki Inagai was important to the man as well, and didn't choose to just run away empty-handed. Akasaka didn't know what to do from this kind of situation. His first priority should probably be to ensure the safety of the boy, doing his captor being less important. Grappling with the perpetrator wasn't something he planned on, but most likely it was either do or die. Akasaka's moment of indecision proved it to be fatal. The man, aiming right between or rather both of Akasaka's eyes, struck out with a jab. Not wanting that, Akasaka raised his hands to shield his face. At that moment, the man kicked at his unguarded midsection. The pain almost felt like his vital organs were being squeezed out of his body, but he lashed onto his opponent's leg. But this opponent didn't hesitate one bit. Leading with his seized foot, the man jumped at Akasaka, applying pressure and pushing him down. Akasaka was unable to withstand that and fell, but under the circumstances, was he letting the leg go? The two men fell together in a tangled heap. The man was desperate to pull his leg free from Akasaka, but having fallen in an awkward position, was unable to. The two of them rolled around on the ground, floundering about trying to gain an advantage. But Akasaka, who was holding on to his opponent's knee with both hands, and that opponent, who had complete freedom to move his upper body, were in two completely different situations. The man gained a positional advantage on Akasaka, who still latched onto his leg and couldn't move away, and pounded full force on his head with both fists. Not only that, he found a rock nearby and beat it against Akasaka's skull. That fucking ow! The difference between being hit with a fist and being hit with a rock was vast! Who would have fucking guessed? Akasaka quickly thought of letting go of the man's leg to free his hands to protect his head, but if he let go here, the man wouldn't go away. If he didn't dig in here, everything would be for naught. The boy he was trying to save was right here. He was going to save him and go back to Tokyo. If he could do that, then it was goodbye. If he could do that, then it was goodbye to this stupid village. Without looking, I could tell my forehead was split open and was gushing blood. But I didn't let go of the man's leg. How could I? I won't let go. When the man realized that no matter how much he beat my head, he wasn't getting away, he used both hands to grab my throat as if to crush my windpipe. I pulled my head back as a slight form of resistance, but it was of no use. The man's hands enveloped my neck and began to crush it like a vice. It was less about the pain of not being able to breathe, so much as it was about choking so hard that it felt like I was going to throw up. It felt like my stomach was going to turn itself inside out, but I could only endure it. Damn it, damn it, damn it! My throat hurts! Yeah, I fucking relate, dude. Mine is literally on fire right now, and it sucks. It is like, I want to die. This hurts so bad. I won't let go. I can't let go. I don't want to be here. I wanted to resolve this and to go back to Tokyo. Go back to Tokyo and talk to Yukie all about our unborn child. We were going to talk about our bright future. I had no intention of loosening my grip. However, it loosened just a bit and the man's leg came free. The man kicked as hard as possible and I tumbled backward. My head was spinning and I was unable to get up right away. No, I couldn't even put any strength into getting up in the first place. Even so, I couldn't back down. If I let him escape now, the chance would never come again. Even just catching their scent was nothing short of a miracle. If we were able to get to the minister's grandson back here, there wouldn't be another chance. The man tried to drag the boy to his feet, but the kid was displaying some unexpected resistance, allowing me to get up unnoticed. I grasped the rock the man had beat me over the head with. Now it was my turn. The rock should be able to supplement a meager strength I had left, adding more than enough power to my attack. My fist, still wrapped around the rock, dug into the side of the man's torso. It seemed like it hurt him quite a bit. The man rolled around for a bit, clutching his side. Freed from the man's grasp, the boy hid behind me. To the boy, those were the words he was waiting for the most. But the crisis was still not over. That was because, even though he was still clutching at his side, the man had gotten up again and had taken a fighting stance. I could see in the man's eyes the resentment at the pain that I had caused him, and the confidence that he could still beat me. If we were to clash head-on again, he might not even stop if my head were split open. The man reacted adversely to the word reinforcement. That was because he now knew that arguing like this wasn't just a waste of time, but put him closer and closer to danger. Realizing that, the man shifted mental gears almost too quickly. What the man pulled out from his back pocket was, of all things, a gun. Of course, I'm a police officer. It's not like I don't know what a gun is, but having one pointed at me was something I'd never experienced before. Was it real? Of course it was. There was no way it would be a replica in a situation like this. As long as he still held that gun, no matter how much I yelled at him, I was at a distinct disadvantage. You villain! I know, right? Really just laying it in there with those burns, man. Jeez. How do you come back from villain? But I still had a fighting chance. If I were in his shoes, instead of wasting time yelling at each other like this, I would just shoot him and take the boy. That way was the fastest and would suppress any sort of further resistance from him. But the man was demanding my surrender without having fired a shot, meaning that he either didn't want to shoot or couldn't. In other words, the man in front of me was soft. If I could buy even just a little more time, the factors that would lead me to victory were numerous. Higurashi was probably on his way. The reinforcements we called for before coming here would already be well on their way too. Not only that, they would have contacted the local police box. Without a doubt, somebody stationed in the village would be here much quicker than that.
クソ誰が撃たれなきゃこいつの怖さがわからねえかよ
どうせ逃げられやしない無駄に罪を重ねるな
At that moment, I heard the rustling of foliage and a heavy footsteps approaching. If Oishi was coming here, it would be a whole new ball game. The man couldn't have more than one gun.
ここですここです
I had thought the time was on my side, but I had failed to even imagine that the enemy could also have reinforcements. Oh, rippy dippy, dude. You could tell the man who had just appeared was one of the perpetrators just by looking
何
at
しよ
him.
ってはよせんとな警官来るんでなん油うっとんしゃん
クソおいさんはどうしたってんだ
あああんの樽男か落としたったら泡吹いとんね
おいさんはクソ
The boy, sensitive to the impending danger, curled up behind my back. How could this be? Damn it!
期待してた相方は来ないってよざまあねえぞ観念するのはてめえの方だ
As I backed up against a large tree while still protecting the boy, the second man also pulled out a
2
gun.
回しか言わない頭抱えてそこにうつ伏せになるんだ
断る
Oh! As I shouted in protest, blood erupted from my left shoulder. It took a few moments to register that I had been shot! Compared to the other ones from the movies and TV dramas, the first actual gunshot I heard was simple and mundane. In fact, the sound was more akin to a small fireworks I used to buy from the corner store as a kid. But there was no comparing the pain. It was a fear you knew only after you'd been shot.
おじさん大丈夫大丈夫
The boy, in his confusion, tugged at my clothes, agitating the wound even further. I wanted to put on a bold face and reassure him, but my voice was hoarse and to the opposite effect.
大丈夫すでに応援は要請してあるんだすぐに警官隊が駆けつけてくれる
警官が来る前にお前ん額にもっぱつくれちゃる方が早いんだ無駄な殺生すなっちゅう本家に言われとんから加減しとんあんまり舐めとんと容赦せんだよ
Yeah, gunshots can be pretty loud. But it also depends on what gun you're firing. There are a lot of factors that can really go into it. The second man was a completely different beast than the first. He had no signs of indecisiveness or mercy. If the man said he'd shoot, he'd shoot. He wasn't somebody that a man like me could buy time from. I really hated to admit it, but at that moment, the image of Nikie's smiling face crossed the back of my mind. I knew what that meant. I was warning myself to not throw my life away over a matter of pride. Of course, I didn't want to die here. I was just starting out a new life with Yukie, and I wanted to see the face of our soon-to-be-born child. Why should I risk my life with some minister's grandson when I was at such a critical juncture of my own life? I needed to stop rambling to myself. What should I do now? Give up the boy and extend my own life? Was that a good idea? Everybody's life is precious. My own life was in danger. Nobody would blame me. Maybe a moment. Yeah, sorry. Allergies are literally fucking killing me today. We are not going past this chapter. I'm sorry. I'm just... Oh, I feel like shit. And I'm just getting progressively worse as the time goes, too, so... I am not feeling great. Okay, it hurts me. If I had known that it would be this painful, I wouldn't have played the tough guy. My biggest miscalculation, though, was that the sound of the gunshot was far quieter than I had imagined. Oh, if it was only that loud, it would have drowned out by the rain in the forest. It wasn't something that somebody far away could hear. I can take it, right? Let's not do it over that one just in case this bugs something out. Alright. So we know that the right one is to plead for my life. Well, let's watch for an opportunity and see what happens. This game gives you choices. Yeah, this game's got a bad end. Or a few of them, from what I gather. Oh, I know the first choice. Shit. I can't afford to die in a place like this. I need to survive and return to Yukie's side. For a moment, I catch a glimmer of hesitation in the eyes of the man holding the gun. This guy is unsure about shooting at me? If so, maybe if I jump him now, I could... In a flash, everything before me grows dark as my consciousness leaves me behind. It was only after my body temperature rapidly came down and a burning sensation in my chest turned numb that I realized I had been shot. RIP. Yeah, they added these for like the they added these for the PS3 and PS2 versions. There we go. Alright, time to plead for our life.
あん、こっちだって死なせとうない。分かればええん、分かれば。
撃つなよ。撃つなよ。帰りを待ってる妻がいるんだ。死にたくないんだよ。
叫ばんとでも歌んね。おとなしゅう頭抱えてうつ伏せになったら歌んだるね。
本当だろうな。本当だろうな。約束は守れよ。絶対だぞ。
ウィー。
男と男の約束だぞ。
守ったんだ。男と男の約束しやよ。
守れよ。守れよ。じゃあうつ伏せになるからな。なるからな。約束守るんだから。銃を向けるのやめろよ。やっぱ撃つ気なんだろ。撃つ気なんだろ。俺が撃つついになったら後頭部を撃つ気なんだろ。
歌んね歌んね。わーった。しまってる。銃はしまってる。男と男の約束しやねえ。どんね。俺なら文句ないんて。ね
え、極めて文句ないですよ。
My hero!
It was over in a flash. The moment he lowered his gun, Oishi didn't let the chance slip by. Oishi had been assessing the situation for quite some time from behind two men. But since they had their guns trained on me, he didn't really have a chance to jump in. Seeing the look on Oishi's face indicating that he wanted me to create an opening, I took on that role completely. Oishi forcefully lifted the arm that he was holding the gun, and then took the gun from the man's hand in only an instant. The other man, who was a bit slow in grasping what was happening, pointed his gun at them, but with his ally grappling with Oishi, he couldn't pull the trigger. If that man was the one who was wrestling with Oishi at the moment, he might have shot without hesitation. But this man wouldn't shoot. He couldn't shoot. Oishi kicked the other man away, and while aiming the stolen gun with his left hand, pulled out his own. With guns akimbo, he was aiming at both men at the same time. Look at Oishi go! Oishi guns akimbo. Man has never fired a shot in his life, but he is the action hero we need.
大手飛車取りってとこですかね。
It was perfectly played, but heedless of the guns pointed at them, the men shouted, "Scram!" as they scattered away at full speed. It was over in an instant. The two men running away without putting up a fight was honestly unexpected. Oishi, quietly clicking his tongue in admonishment, slipped both guns into his pants pockets.
あいつらもよく知ってるな。
Look, you gotta let Oishi have his moment, okay? He's gotta have his action hero moment.
何をですか？
逃げてる背中を警官は撃てませんからね。
And, have you talked to the police lately? Corrado Oishi. I've got some stories that you might want to read in the year 2020.
私も退職金が惜しいもんで。
Imagine a cop being afraid of the consequences of his actions while on duty. The crookedest cop in Okinomiya has more morals than any cop we have on the force today. Oishi and I grinned at each other.
君が犬飼俊樹君？犬飼検察大臣のお孫さん？
はい。
こりゃでかい事件になるかな。どうせトカゲの尻尾切りになるんでしょうけどね。
Oishi smiled amusedly. The fact that the Onikafuchi Defense Alliance, or rather the Sonozaki family behind them, was pulling the strings was apparent, but proving it wouldn't be easy. And with the apology to Oishi, this incident was unlikely to go public. If this caused an uproar, it would obviously lead to the minister losing his office. With HQ having decided that doing so was in national interest, this would probably be cleaned up quietly. It might be a rough way of saying it, but this was born in the shadows, and it was going to die in the shadows. Oishi probably already understood the implications behind this incident.
とにかく非常線を張らせましょう。連中まだ一丁は拳銃を持ってるようですからね。それから犬飼君を保護して赤坂さんはすぐに病院に行かないと。
As the tension of the situation faded, the pain from the gunshot and the wound in my shoulder blossomed once again. My forehead was also stinging painfully and had grown hot enough to start a fire. Thinking that tension had caused me to sweat, I wiped my forehead, but what came off was a large amount of blood. I realized that my shirt had been stained bright crimson with the blood flowing from my head. I turned around. The boy was safe and sound, without a doubt. There would probably be an investigation on the men who ran, but that was for another day. At this point in time, I could safely say we had cleared the major hurdle of securing the boy's safety. We did it! As soon as I recognized that, it felt like the lights in my head had been hit by a power failure. My knees buckled from underneath me and the ground there, feeling as soft as a cloud. It didn't feel unpleasant, even as I was covered from the rain-soaked mud. Oishi came closer, asking if I was okay, but somehow I couldn't tell. I turned off the switch to the last light in my head. The exhaustion enveloped me. Sleep. Something softer than any blanket wrapped around me. And we got a tip! We have a very kind person. Well, that could describe any of you fine people in my chat right now. This tip could literally be about any one of you. Patients admitted to the hospital can only accept calls at fixed times. That's why she wouldn't be receiving a call from him today. Yesterday, she had teased him that he got lonely easily, so he might have struggled with the idea of calling her sooner. That was much easier to imagine rather than he might be too busy to call, because he wasn't that type of person. Yukie, whispering that, smiled to herself. The announcement that visiting hours were over played over the hospital intercom along with some music. She exchanged pleasantries with the family and the patient that was staying in the same room as her. Probably eager for his mother to be discharged, their small child was wearing a beaming smile. The child's mother was pregnant in the bed next to mine, and what might have been their new brother or sister. They were probably ready to burst with the expectations, dreams, and worries of having a new sibling. The joys of growing a family, bathing in those warm feelings, I stroked my own belly, which had grown quite large. I had talked to him about how many children we wanted to have. We talked about how if we were to have 3, it would certainly be lively. However, there was an inescapable worry that whether I would be able to handle giving birth that
で
many
もそんな
times.
ことを不安に思って出産を嫌う母なんていないですものね。
Yukie, smiling as she said that to herself, gently stroked her stomach. The Metropolitan Public Safety Division. The place where that man's sense of justice had led him. That person was actually a very gentle, very fragile person. He didn't talk much about the specifics, but I didn't think that he was suited for the assignments that he was on right now. But as long as he said he was going to try his best, I would watch over him
あなた
warmly.
のお父さんはね、とっても頑張り屋さんなのよ。こちょこちょこちょこちょ。
Yukie seemed to be enjoying herself as she talked to her own belly. That's a funny, dumb way of wording that. I'm gonna talk to my belly. At that moment, Yukie suddenly became concerned about something and looked out the window. It used to be this time, long ago. She remembered that when she was little, around this time in the countryside where her grandmother lived, the Higurashi would fill the air with their chorus. This was the middle of Tokyo. Unlike the countryside, you couldn't hear the song of the Higurashi. But for some reason, at that moment, Yukie felt like she wanted to hear that song. And that is our tip. And I know I said we were going to try and shotgun a bunch of this. I can't. I'm just, like, my throat is on fire. My eyes are watering. My sinuses are jacked. Allergies are 100% just destroying me at the moment. And I literally can't go on. So, apologies. We will wrap this up Monday evening, hopefully. And tomorrow night, we're going to be doing Game of the Decade. So I obviously don't want to blow out my voice before we have to do that. So, Game of the Decade will be tomorrow night at about 5 p.m. start time. That's probably going to run a little long. We've got 99 games to talk about. And that's going to be fun. We put a lot of effort into that. You all put a lot of effort into that. And it's cool to finally have that coming to a close. And then Monday evening at about 6 or 7, we're going to wrap this up. So thanks everybody for coming out. Super sorry that we couldn't just kind of to blaze through the finale like I wanted to, but I feel like garbage. Like, I want to die right now. Let's see if there's anybody streaming, and we'll toss a host off. Let's see who be streaming. I know what I was watching earlier, and if he's still streaming, I'll probably just throw that over to him. Yeah, Murphigator's doing 12 hours of arcade games, so I'm just going to send you all on over there. So enjoy some arcade games by somebody that's very, very good at playing arcade games. And we will see you all tomorrow night for Game of the Decade. Thanks for coming out, everybody. Much love.